Alright, so today I got my old 74 F-100 with me. If you follow my channel for a long time, I've had this truck with me throughout the whole time I've had my YouTube channel. I've had the thing for about 10-12 years now or so, and back when I got it I went ahead and did a T5 swap, and recently I switched to a roller 5.0 out of a 94 Bronco, and I still have the T5 setup. And if you're not familiar with the T5, it's a 5-speed transmission that's the common swap unit comes out of the old Fox body Mustang, and that's what I have in mine. And it's held up pretty good for the last 12 years. So anyway, today I'm going to do a pretty informal video here on kind of the parts and pieces I use to go ahead and swap it into my daily driver style F-100 here. You know, it's really not too involved, and this is pretty much the cheapest way I could find to do it, and it's been pretty reliable, obviously, as we've had it together for so long. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to pop the hood and we'll work through this thing and note all the changes that are required to your original 3-speed on the column F-100 to make it a 5-speed rig. Alright, so jumping under the hood here, we have our little roller 94 Bronco engine. It actually came out of Kevin, or as you might know him as Junkyard Digs at YouTube. It came out of his Bronco. It was actually his first vehicle that he rolled, and he had this sitting in the garage for a while, and I went ahead and bought it off of him, and I didn't do too much for working it over, really. I figured it was probably a decent engine being from a rolled vehicle, so pretty much I just stripped it down, painted it, put a new oil pump in it because we're down at the pan, and it just makes sense to do that when you have the opportunity, and really just switch the fuel injection setup over to carburation. And if you're interested how to do that, you can check further back in my videos where I did switch this engine all over on camera. But anyway, sticking to the T5 here today and that swap. So again, I maintained all the mechanical linkage from the original 3-speed. I felt like that was the cheapest and most simple way to do this. So anyway, it still uses the old Z-bar, just like the old 3-speed did. Now the old 289 engine that I had in here, and what you'll have if you have your original 302 or whatever you might have for a small block in here, is you're going to have a clutch pivot that comes over to your block. And on this specific engine, the alteration I had to make was obviously on the 5.0 engine, they omitted that feature. So you can buy a little adapter that bolts to the back of the bell housing, and that's what I have here. And then our little pivot then screws into that adapter, and then where it mounts down here to the frame, if you can see that, I went ahead and shimmed that up. You can see some just some shim stock chunks of metal I used there, but really you could use washers. It's not a big deal. And basically I just wanted to make sure that that was good and level. So that's really the main difference between the roller 5.0 engines and the old school engines that would have originally came in this vehicle. But anyway, moving on from there, let me hop under the truck so we can get a better perspective, and then we'll talk about everything we did from the back of the engine to the trans. So anyway, looking in here, again with our 5.0 swap, we didn't have that pivot, so this is another look at that little adapter piece that our pivot screws into, which again, I'll link the part number, and I'll try and link all the part numbers of the stuff that I use because I'm still pretty familiar with it all. But anyway, I opted to go ahead and use the original bell housing. And reason being is because the way the clutch works on this old school guy with the mechanical clutch linkage is it's designed to push on this clutch fork. Now the later models used a cable clutch where they pull on the clutch fork so the pivot is on the opposite side. So that presented a few issues because the 5.0 engine here, the later era is a 50-ounce imbalance engine, and they did not make any flywheels this size. So this bell housing is fairly large, and back in the day they used an 11-inch flywheel and clutch assembly. So what I ended up using, and what's oddly the same, is the late 80s F-150. Again, I'll link the part to this flywheel, but that flywheel in particular is actually an 11-inch clutch, and it's a 50-ounce balance. So with running the roller engine, I was able to use that flywheel inside the original bell housing, and that way we had all the correct balance in our engine. Now if you're running the old school engine, again, you don't even really have to mess with all this. All this is still stock. You're going to use a stock flywheel, stock clutch, and this is all pretty simple so far. But with the 5.0, those are just some of the changes. So we have the additional flywheel, and then the clutch setup for the F-150 is a diaphragm style, and it's set up for hydraulics, so it felt kind of weird. I put it all together once, I didn't like it, and then I pulled it all apart, and oddly enough, the F-150 flywheel has two different bolt patterns, and it actually accepts a 10-inch clutch as well, a finger style clutch, versus a diaphragm clutch, which with the mechanical linkage just feels a lot better. So I ended up using, I believe it was out of an inline 660s Ford truck. It was a 10-inch clutch setup for that, and I also believe you can use a late, or I guess early 80s Fox body clutch assemblies. It's also a 10-inch. So that works pretty good, and with using that 11-inch flywheel, you can still use your old school starter, and it bolts up to your bell housing the way it should, and the vehicle starts properly. Now, the biggest obscurity here between using the old school bell housing and the T5 transmission here is that you're going to need to use an adapter plate to bolt this transmission to this bell housing. I'll link one below. I actually machined this one with my dad way back in the day, but it's kind of funny, for all the time I spent doing that, they actually make a unit to do this from the old school pattern bell housings to the T5, and I'll link that. So far, if you maintained your old engine, this is the only change that you're going to have so far. So now coming in here further on the old T5 swap, I actually used my original cross member, and either I drilled some new holes for my cross member to locate on, or it went into some original holes. I don't remember, but you can see that obviously I didn't have to move things too terribly much. I added some shims right here up to the tail shaft of the transmission to keep everything nice and uniform, and that worked out really well. Now this truck in particular is actually a long bed unit, so it's actually a two-piece drive shaft. Now in this case, what I just ended up doing is using a 5.0 drive shaft and a 5.0 yoke, and then I cut it and modified it to my original drive shaft to the F-100. Now you don't need to do this really. You can go to a drive shaft shop. There's a lot of those around. You just bring in the yoke. You can buy the yoke real easy off of Summit, and I'll try and link that as well. But you can just take that yoke in and tell them the measurements. This is real simple. Bring in your old drive shaft, and they'll make you a new balanced drive shaft for usually $200 to $300. This is a pretty short one, so it might even be cheaper. But the benefit to that is you have it all balanced up nice, and you know, after I did all this fab work myself, it still cost me $100 to take it in and have it balanced. So I'm not really sure if that was the best way to go about it. Like I said, definitely you can go to a transmission shop and they can do it for you. Now, I'm trying to think of anything else under the truck. Really, the other thing you want to look at is your differential. Some of the old 3-speed rigs, they used a differential with, like, you know, 3 flat gears or something in that neighborhood. And with the old T5, that's really going to wind out pretty good. So if you're at least running a 31-inch tire like I am, you know, you want to be above like a 373 gear ratio or so. And I believe I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 411 gears. It was done before I got the truck. You know, with the 3-speed, it maxed out at like 45 miles an hour. So it actually worked out quite well for me, but that's something you also want to look into. So let's jump up in the cab of the truck and take a look at some of the modifications there. All right, so jumping up here in the cab, I would say the main modification inside of the vehicle itself is that you actually have to cut the transmission tunnel, and then obviously I made something here so that it would raise up a little bit and clear that T5 transmission. Now I do believe they sell plates to do this, where I again just went ahead and made my own. And those plates are pretty cheap, but originally I already had a big gaping hole in this guy from someone cutting in a 3-speed on the floor. So after I patched that up, and then we went with the 5-speed way back when, we went ahead and just made this plate. But if you don't do this, the transmission will be sitting at an awful angle. It's going to leak out all of its trans fluid, and really it's just terrible drive shaft angle. There's a lot of problems with it. So that is probably the biggest caveat to the T5 swap, is you do need to relieve this unit. The old 3 speeds, all the linkage was on the side of the transmission. With the T5, it's a little bit taller, there's more gears, plus the linkage runs along the top of the unit, so it makes for a taller transmission. Now, as far as the shifter goes and the seat, a lot of people end up running buckets, but if we go down into fourth here and we press in the clutch, there we go. We still clear the seat pretty good. Obviously you wouldn't want to be riding on the seat. Now granted, I do have my seat pushed all the way back. I'm 6'5", so this is something you want to consider as well. You might have to run buckets if you need to slide your seat way up. But this is the normal throw to the transmission here. And appreciate that baseball bat shifter from way back when I was in high school, and all this other weird stuff from when I was in high school as well. But anyway, it clears the seat pretty good for me, but that's something you want to consider as well. A lot of guys use the S10 T5 and they use the tail shaft housing for that and put that onto their Ford T5 unit, and that makes for moving the shifter position forward. But for me, I kind of like this. I can sit back in my seat and shift the thing real nice, so it worked out for me. But that's also something to consider that a lot of people don't talk about too much. But other than that, I really can't think of anything else inside of the vehicle, and I really think that's everything I had to do to swap this over to a T5, this truck. It was pretty straightforward, and really it makes for way better drivability on this rig. So I've really enjoyed it in the last 10-12 years. I've put I think like 30 or 40,000 miles on it in that time, and it's been very enjoyable. So it's a night and day difference between driving around a 3-speed truck, and I highly recommend it. Now I think total in this swap, and I'll try and drop a numeric value of how much you should expect it to cost, but definitely under $1,000 to swap this over. And if you can fab stuff, it gets, again, you know, exceedingly cheaper, as you can see from all the stuff that I did fab. But really you don't need to. You can go out and buy most all of these parts and make this happen very easily. So anyway, that pretty much does it for the old T5 swap in the 74 F-100. I'm gonna grab the dogs here out of the truck, and we're gonna go and enjoy our nice summer Iowa evening. So we'll catch y'all later. Sit. Good boy.